Hello everyone, I hope you're all well and staying safe. I want to give a brief overview of what an REMP is aiming to achieve in terms of environmental management. This is to provide some context when you start your discussions. These slides are a summary of some of the discussions which took place in Evora last November. A more detailed briefing paper is being prepared by Becky Hitchens, Malcolm Clark and others, which will form the basis of future discussions in the LTC. Could I have the first slide, please? This slide provides a summary of the relationship between the various terms used in the environmental management. I'm grateful to Becky Hitchen for providing this schema for the paper she's leading on environmental goals and objectives. In terms of this workshop, the main area of interest is the section above the dotted line. So in this talk, I will outline the legal context and the guiding principles which are derived from this context, then deal with the overall goals for an REMP, the objectives which provide the action points in the plan, and then say something of the management principles which should form the framework for all subsequent actions. Could I have the next slide, please? The legal context for an REMP is based within UNCLOS. REMPs are a mechanism that facilitates the actions of the regulator and the contractor to ensure that the principles enshrined in UNCLOS are fulfilled. The key articles are listed in this slide, and I think they are familiar to most of us. The main aim is the effective protection of the marine environment for the benefit of all humankind. Could I have the next slide, please? From UNCLOS, it's possible to derive a series of guiding principles which should underpin any management plan and guide activities in the area. This is a summary of the principles developed for the CCFZ REMP. However, I think they're sufficiently generic to stand and be used for most REMPs. They reflect UNCLOS. Plans have to recognize that the management of the area is for the benefit of all humankind. Activities should employ a precautionary approach, particularly to ensure the protection and preservation of the marine environment. No activity, particularly those which involve exploitation of resources, should be undertaken without prior environmental impact assessments. This is to ensure that any exploitation does not lead to the unsustainable use of biodiversity, and it might be added here, the use of any finite resource. Finally, the development of the plan need to be done in a transparent way, one that takes account of the views of the range of different stakeholders. Any decision and implementation must be clear and well explained. Could I have the next slide, please? So what should be the goals for a Mid-Atlantic Ridge REMP? Goals reflect high-level outcomes that the plan is trying to achieve. These are the goals which were discussed in Evora. To ensure the protection of the marine environment and vulnerable ecosystems throughout the mining process. To protect vent communities and other fragile ecosystems such as Gorgonian fields. To ensure that the natural biodiversity together with the functions and diversity of these habitats are maintained. Now, it is one of the most remarkable aspects of many ridge habitats is that they bring together unique combinations of life. Preserving such distinct and unique ecosystems should be a key element of an REMP for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. While the argument for ecosystem services has been well made many times, what has not been so well articulated is the need to preserve habitats and ecosystems for their intrinsic value to enable biota to cope with change. And we know that change is coming. We know it's coming on a range of timescales. It's important that we plan for this to ensure that where possible, these fragile and often amazing habitats and their associated life are able to survive. And finally, exploitation needs to be responsible and sustained within the framework of the environmental regulations and guidelines to ensure that the principles laid out in UNCLOS are fulfilled. Could I have the next slide, please? In Evora, we didn't actually discuss objectives in great detail, and so this slide presents the main high-level objectives which we were able to discuss. Objectives are how goals are going to be met. They guide the actions to ensure the attainment of our goals and uphold our principles. Following UNCLOS, its first objective is to minimize pollution that might arise from mining activities. We need to minimize any loss of habitat and the living resources that rely on that habitat. So it's important to maintain regional diversity at all levels: ecosystem, species, and the gene. Critically will be the ability of communities to recover from any impacts. And this means that activities must be careful not to destroy the links between populations along the ridge. Activities should not result in the reduction of ecosystem complexity and alter the functionality of such ecosystems and the services they provide. This last point in this list is that it is important to make sure the activities do not add more environmental pressure, such that the biota can no longer cope and respond to change. We do not want to change the evolutionary trajectory such that fragile event systems are pushed into extinction. And the way to avoid this is to preserve multiple representatives of these ecosystems and habitats, such that there are sufficient to be able to deal with natural variation and events, as well as the uncertain environmental future. Could I have the next slide, please? The final aspect of goals and objectives is the management enabling principles. These are the principles which should guide management actions at the scale of the operation. To develop REMPs, activities should use an ecosystem approach, looking across a wider horizon than just the contract area, looking at what is happening in the region. The approach should be based on the best available scientific evidence, and where necessary, undertake actions which will address any gaps. Look at the potential for cumulative impacts for mining, fishing, and other human activities, as well as climate change and natural environmental cycles. Key to understanding the impact of activities associated with mining is to know what was happening before, what's taking place during, and what's happening after any activity, which might impact the environment. Monitoring, therefore, has to be a vigorous element of regional environmental management. Finally, regional management and the activities to support it need collaboration between the various actors. There's also a need to develop capacity to enable the participation of developing states, thus ensuring that all humankind has a stake in making sure that the regional management is effective. In the discussions over the coming week, it'll be important to discuss and keep in mind the objectives for this RMP and to focus on the operational level objectives and what management actions will be needed. These actions and objectives will inform what various tools, measures, and mechanisms are needed in developing the REMP for the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Could I have the next slide, please? A final slide, and this is just some ideas that I put together to try and give us an idea of what we might discuss and the format we might discuss. It's an idea of how the various tools, mechanisms, methodologies interact at the various areas and who is responsible for driving the development of the various aspects of the Regional Environmental Management Plan. For the Mid-Atlantic Ridge System, I think there are basically 3 levels, and this reflects the complexity and heterogeneity of the ridge and its surrounding areas. On the first level, we have the whole region that we're going to look at. In this case, the ridge system from south to north. And here the main management approach is to look for areas with different levels of protection to ensure that there are representative habitats and ecosystems preserved, ensuring connectivity between vent sites and other fragile habitats. And the responsible body charged with this is the ISA as the regulator. The next tier down are the habitats around the vent fields and the large patches of fragile habitats such as octocoral fields. This is where our discussions need to be focused, I think. It's here where operational objectives and related management measures need to be developed. Here, adaptive management as well as area-based tools will be of most use, supported by cumulative impact modelling. At this scale, the regulator is still the main actor, that is the ISA, but with increasing input from the contractor. And finally, there's the level of the contract block. Here, tools such as the EIA the environmental monitoring and management plan, the development of PRZs, relinquishment, and the environmental risk assessment become important. This is the area where the regulator establishes management actions through regulations and guidelines, but it's the contractor who is the main actor. This is also the case that the actions of the contractor may impact on the next level up, particularly if the contract area is small and the impact potentially extend beyond the mining site. So in terms of this workshop, the focus has to be on the first two levels, but with suggestions on how to manage the interface between the contract block and the surrounding area. As I said, this is just some ideas to try and structure some of the discussion, and I'm sure that you'll have many of your own. So thank you for listening.